If you clicked on this because you saw a headline claiming Harry made some final decision that sent the palace into panic, I want to be upfront with you right away. That's not what happened. What did happen is real, it's interesting, and it says a lot about where this family actually stands right now, but it's a much more grounded story than the dramatic version floating around. So let's go through exactly what's been reported, because the real version is genuinely worth understanding. If you want more of this kind of grounded, fact-checked coverage, consider subscribing. Let's get into it. Here's what Harry actually decided, according to recent reporting from The Times. Following last month's family visit to Highgrove, where Harry, Meghan, and their children Archie and Lilibet spent time with King Charles, Harry has decided to increase the frequency of his trips back to the UK. Instead of visiting occasionally and mostly around legal battles or specific work engagements, which has largely been the pattern for the past several years, he's reportedly planning to come back and forth every few months going forward. One insider close to the situation described the current approach as working well, which is why the frequency is set to increase, especially as the Invictus Games in Birmingham get closer. That's really the core of it. It's not Harry cutting ties, it's not Harry quitting anything, and it's definitely not some dramatic ultimatum aimed at his father. It's the opposite, actually, a decision to be more present, more often, in a way that's reportedly been driven by how energized he's felt after reconnecting with his children's grandfather. Sources describe Harry as feeling genuinely buoyed by seeing Archie and Lilibet spend time with Charles, especially given it had been around 4 years since the king had seen his grandchildren in person before that Highgrove visit. So why is this being framed by some outlets as some kind of shocking, panic-inducing moment? Mostly because Harry plans to visit more often doesn't generate the same clicks as Palace in Panic, even though the actual reporting doesn't support that kind of framing at all. If anything, the tone from insiders has been cautiously optimistic. One source noted that Harry is happy about where things are heading, and that these trips can now focus more on his patronages and charitable work rather than being constantly overshadowed by legal drama, which has defined a lot of his previous UK visits. That's a meaningfully different story than the one implied by dramatic thumbnails. And it's worth taking a second to actually sit with what it means. A working relationship between Harry and his father that's stable enough to plan around, rather than one defined by crisis. This is genuinely useful to understand as a pattern, not just for this specific story, but for how a lot of royal news gets packaged online in general. Real royal reporting, the kind that comes from established outlets with actual sources close to the family, tends to be fairly incremental and cautious, because these are stories built on off-the-record briefings that could dry up if they're wildly exaggerated. The dramatic headlines usually come from a second layer, aggregator sites and social media accounts that take a fairly mundane, positive development and repackage it with words like shocking, panic, or final decision, because that performs better. Recognizing that gap is honestly one of the most useful skills you can have as someone who follows this family closely, because it lets you separate what's actually happening from what's just good marketing copy wrapped around a real story. Now, why is this happening now specifically? A big part of the timing comes down to the Invictus Games. Harry founded the event years ago to support wounded, injured, and sick servicemen and women, and the next edition is heading to Birmingham. Reports have described the Games as personally important to Harry, with him wanting this edition to be, in his words as relayed by sources, the best one yet. There have reportedly been conversations about whether Charles might attend the opening ceremony, though nothing has been confirmed on that front, given that we've also covered the funding difficulties facing the 2027 Games in previous coverage, tens of millions of pounds short, with sponsors like Boeing stepping back, having Harry more visibly present and building momentum in the UK ahead of the event. Makes a lot of practical sense, separate from the family relationship angle entirely. There's a strategic logic to this that goes beyond just personal motivation, too. Hosting a major international event is as much about relationship building and fundraising as it is about the competition itself. And that kind of groundwork is very hard to do from a distance. Sponsors want to see visible commitment before they sign on. Government bodies want reassurance that an event is being taken seriously before they approve funding or security arrangements. And potential patrons and supporters respond better to in-person engagement than to a name attached to a foundation thousands of miles away. If Harry is serious about turning around the funding picture for Birmingham 2027, being physically present in the UK more consistently over the next year isn't just a nice personal bonus. It's close to a practical necessity. That's likely part of why this decision reads as more calculated than impulsive. Even though the emotional motivation, wanting to see his father and children more, is clearly real too. The two reasons aren't in conflict. They're reinforcing each other, which is probably exactly why the decision has stuck, rather than being just another one-off visit. It's also worth noting that Harry's increased travel isn't guaranteed to run smoothly every time. He's set to return to the UK again next month, but as of the most recent reporting, it isn't yet confirmed whether he'll stay at Buckingham Palace, which had been floated after an earlier accommodation dispute during his July visit, or whether he'll actually meet with his father in person, since Charles is expected to be at Balmoral around that time. So this is very much an evolving month-to-month situation rather than a fixed, locked-in arrangement, which is honestly a more realistic picture of where this relationship stands than a single dramatic headline could capture. It's worth pausing here to compare this to how Harry's UK visits have looked historically, because the contrast is a big part of why this counts as a genuine shift, rather than just more of the same. For years, his trips back to Britain have been tied almost entirely to two things: court dates in his ongoing legal battles, including his case against the publisher of the Daily Mail over phone hacking and privacy claims, and occasional tightly scheduled work engagements for causes he's stayed involved with. Those trips were often brief, heavily scrutinized, and, by most accounts, emotionally difficult. Arriving in a country where he'd have to navigate security arrangements, media attention, and a family relationship that was often frosty at best. A trip built around seeing his father and children, with the legal drama pushed further into the background, is a meaningfully different kind of visit, even if it doesn't come with any grand announcement attached to it. Let's talk about how Charles has actually responded, because this is where the encouraging nod language comes from. Reporting describes Charles as genuinely supportive of Harry's decision to visit more frequently, consistent with the broader pattern we've covered before of Charles prioritizing time with his son and grandchildren following his own health scare. There's no indication in any of the recent reporting that Charles is upset, blindsided, or panicked by this decision. If anything, it appears to be something he's welcomed. That tracks with everything we know about how Charles has approached this relationship over the past year. Quietly, personally, and clearly motivated by wanting more time with people he cares about while he can. It's worth thinking about what this actually costs Charles politically within his own household, because it isn't nothing. Every additional visit from Harry that goes smoothly is, in a sense, a small vote of confidence that risks being read as the king favoring reconciliation with his estranged son over the concerns of his heir and the working family around him. Charles has to know that William isn't fully on board, and he's choosing to proceed anyway. That's a genuinely notable decision for a monarch who is, by nature and by institutional role, usually inclined toward caution and consensus, rather than pushing ahead despite internal disagreement. It suggests that whatever health-related reflection Charles has gone through over the past 2 years has meaningfully shifted how he weighs personal relationships against institutional smoothness, at least in this one specific area of his life. Now here's where the actual tension in this story lives, and it's not between Harry and Charles, it's between Harry and William. According to the same reporting, Prince William is not particularly happy about this development. That's consistent with what we've covered before. Harry and William remain estranged, and multiple reports have confirmed they haven't been on speaking terms for years. William reportedly views Harry's past criticism of the family, through the memoir, the Netflix documentary, and various television interviews, as something that hasn't been adequately addressed or apologized for. And by several accounts, he's not inclined to compromise on that just because Harry is spending more time with their father. There's a really telling detail that illustrates this. The last time William and Harry were reportedly in the same room together was 2 years ago, at the funeral of their uncle, Robert Fellowes, and according to sources, they reportedly didn't even look in each other's direction. That's the actual state of the brothers' relationship right now, and it hasn't meaningfully shifted just because Harry and Charles have been rebuilding their own connection separately. This puts William in a genuinely awkward position, and it's worth thinking through why. As the future king, and as someone who's been absorbing more of the day-to-day institutional workload while his father manages his health, William has to navigate his father's personal choices about family reconciliation without necessarily agreeing with them, and without publicly undermining them either. Royal commentators have pointed out that this is a delicate balance. William can't be seen to openly contradict Charles's decisions as monarch, but he's also not required to personally embrace a relationship he's not ready for. That's likely part of why he and Kate have reportedly kept a physical distance during some of Harry's UK trips, being elsewhere in the country for other engagements, rather than making any kind of public statement about it either way. It's a quiet, practical way of managing a disagreement without turning it into a public rift on top of the one that already exists. Which brings us to a genuinely interesting test case coming up. The 30th anniversary of Princess Diana's death, which falls next year. Diana remains one of the few things Harry and William are still connected through. They're both patrons of the Diana Award, and both have spoken about honoring her memory in their respective work. 5 years ago, the two brothers did put their differences aside to jointly unveil a statue of their mother. So there is at least some precedent for cooperation around milestones tied to Diana specifically. But royal author Phil Dampier, speaking to the Daily Mail, was fairly skeptical that a similar moment of unity will happen again this time. He noted that whatever cooperation existed around the statue unveiling happened under very different circumstances, and that things between the brothers have gotten considerably worse since then. According to people close to William, he's said to view Harry as belonging to the past at this point, with his focus firmly on his own immediate family, Kate and their children George, Charlotte, and Louis, rather than on repairing things with his brother. Whether that holds up once the actual anniversary approaches remains to be seen. But right now, the expectation among royal commentators leans toward the brothers marking the day separately rather than together. If that does end up happening, separate tributes rather than a joint appearance, it would be a genuinely significant, if quiet, signal about where this family actually stands, heading into a milestone that matters enormously to the public. Diana remains one of the most beloved figures in modern royal history, and a 30th anniversary is exactly the kind of moment that tends to generate massive public attention, and often public pressure for reconciliation gestures. If William and Harry can't find a way to mark it together, even briefly, even symbolically, it would suggest the rift runs deeper than a few private visits between Harry and Charles are able to touch. On the other hand, if circumstances shift over the next year and reconciliation between Harry and Charles continues to build genuine momentum, there's at least a chance the pressure of the anniversary itself could force some kind of joint gesture, even a modest one, simply because the alternative, two very public, very separate tributes to their mother, would generate its own uncomfortable headlines about the state of the family. Let's shift briefly to another story that's continued developing in the background. The ongoing situation involving Andrew. Recent reporting indicates that scrutiny of his conduct and finances has continued to intensify, with new developments in the broader investigation tied to his past associations. This isn't a new story. We've covered the core of it before: Andrew losing his titles, giving up Royal Lodge, and becoming a near-total absence from royal life. But it's a reminder that this particular chapter for the family is still actively unfolding rather than fully resolved. It continues to run in parallel with the more personal, slower-moving story of Harry's reconciliation with his father. And together, they paint a picture of a family managing multiple, very different kinds of pressure at the same time. It's worth noting the contrast between how the family has handled these two situations, because it says something real about priorities. With Andrew, the response has been public, formal, and largely irreversible. Stripped titles, a change of address, and continued cooperation with outside scrutiny. With Harry, everything has moved in the opposite direction: private, informal, and deliberately reversible if it doesn't work out. That's not a coincidence. It reflects two very different kinds of risk. Andrew's situation involves serious allegations tied to a convicted sex offender, something that threatens the institution's core credibility if handled with any ambiguity. Harry's situation, whatever the history of public criticism and strained relationships, doesn't carry that same institutional risk. It's fundamentally a family relationship that can be rebuilt or allowed to stall without threatening the monarchy's standing either way. Charles appears to be treating the two situations accordingly: decisive and public where the stakes demand it, patient and private where they don't. Quick break. If you want the full breakdown of exactly how the Andrew situation has developed, or a deeper look at the Charles-Harry relationship from the beginning, drop a comment letting me know which one you'd rather see covered next, and I'll prioritize it. So, to bring this back around to that headline, no, there was no final decision that shocked King Charles, and no, the palace is not in panic. What's actually happening is more measured and, honestly, more human than that. A father managing his own health recovery who's chosen to prioritize time with a son and grandchildren he'd been distant from for years. A son who's decided to show up more consistently as a result, and an older brother who isn't ready to extend the same grace, watching all of it happen from a careful distance. None of that is resolved, and none of it is likely to be fully resolved anytime soon. But it's a real, ongoing story worth understanding accurately rather than through an exaggerated thumbnail. What's worth watching going forward is whether Harry's more frequent visits actually hold up as a consistent pattern over the next few months, whether he ends up staying at Buckingham Palace or meeting Charles at Balmoral on his next trip, and whether the run-up to the Birmingham Invictus Games brings any confirmation about Charles attending the opening ceremony. Those are the concrete, verifiable things to track, rather than speculative claims about ultimatums or palace panic that simply aren't supported by the actual reporting. That's the real state of things as of mid-August 2026. A family working through illness, historical estrangement, and a slow, imperfect rebuilding process, mostly one relationship at a time. If there's a genuine update, a confirmed visit, an actual statement, or real movement on the William side of things, I'll be covering it here, so make sure you're subscribed for that. That's genuinely the most honest way to describe where this stands right now. No grand resolution, no final chapter, just an ongoing month-to-month situation that's worth following closely, rather than reducing to a single dramatic headline. And if you missed our earlier breakdown of the Highgrove reunion and everything that led up to this point, I covered that in detail in another video. You can check it out by clicking right here.